All right. Howdy, everyone. This is Aaron Clark at Stewardship Partners. Welcome to the fourth session in the Puget Sound Green Infrastructure Summit webinar series. Happy that you could come. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. On behalf of Stewardship Partners and the Summit Host Committee, I would like to acknowledge that we are all on the traditional land of the first people of this region. Tacoma, where the summit was originally to be hosted, is the traditional land of the Puyallup tribe, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the Puyallup tribe, who have been faithful stewards of the land, water, and ancient history of life there since time immemorial. Many of us are attending the summit from other parts of the region, and if you do not currently know on whose traditional land you work and live, we encourage you to find out. Please take a moment to acknowledge with gratitude the land where you are and its first people. So we have many sponsors to thank. I will not name them because I want to move on to our speakers quickly, but all of these organizations and companies have been a huge help to all of us. And wait, did I skip ahead one too many? Oh, and I also want to make sure we acknowledge our host committee as well as our advisory committee. And of course, the logistics team here at Stewardship Partners and our partners at Cascadia Consulting. There's a lot of heroes that go into making an event like this work and work smoothly. So thank you. A little bit of guidance on having and participating in and watching a webinar in this, modern COVID era that we're all faced with. Certainly everybody is dealing with the realities in many different ways. And patience is really the key. I keep finding this personally over and over again. Patience with myself, patience with the human realities around me, whether it's screaming children or whatever that's going on. Patience is the key. And as we're relatively new to webinars, patience with the technology is always appreciated too. And I've thrown this out there, but making sure all of our speakers are aware that there is a culture in this summit around everybody acknowledging the humanity of this time. And, if you have a kid or a dog or something running through the background of your screen, we understand. And to that end, whoever has the most glorious interruption of all will get a Stewardship Partners lapel pin mailed to them. So I think you all are up to that challenge. Since this is a Zoom webinar, I'm sure most folks are familiar, but just to ground everyone in how to use the tools, the presentation is being recorded. It will be available on the Stewardship Partners YouTube channel, and links will be provided on the Summit webpage, 12,000raingardens.org/summit. You'll be able to link to each presentation in its recorded form there. As an attendee, you will be muted and your video will be turned off. But you will be able to ask questions through the Q&A feature, and that's in the button down at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A. That is where you can post questions to the speakers. The speakers will either respond in writing or live through the webinar, or if we don't have enough time, those questions will be saved and shared with speakers, and there will be opportunity for direct follow-up through email and such. Also the chat function, use that if you're having any technical difficulties. Our technical team will help you out in whatever way you need. So chat for technical, Q&A for questions, and that's it. And whenever you have to leave the meeting, just click the little red button down in the corner that says leave meeting. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my friend, colleague, and hero of stormwater and green infrastructure. A humble hero indeed, but Ani Jayakaran, Washington State University, longtime partner in the summit convenings over the years. And with that, Ani, take it away.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Ani Jayakaran, and thank you for the very gracious introduction, Aaron. I'm an associate professor and faculty member at Washington State University, and I work for WC Extension out of the Puyallup Research and Extension Center. And that's where we serve the land grant mission to take science to community. So my focus is on improving GSI design and implementation through applied research and education. And I have graduate degrees in biosystems engineering and civil engineering. I also serve as a host committee for this conference, and it's been amazing to see how much the summit has grown, both in terms of interest and the numbers of people attending. So despite major disturbances to its organization, winter storms, global pandemics, the summit still thrives, and much like the resilient ecosystems we seek to preserve around us. So to honor one aspect of those ecosystems, this session is dedicated to trees and their roles in green infrastructure. We built this session on 4 presentations. You may have 5 in your agenda, but we figured it would make sense to just combine talks 4 and 5. So I'm very excited to be the moderator for this session. Our very first speaker is Chris Hilton, and she is the Urban Partnerships Director of the Nature Conservancy's Puget Sound program, where she is advancing regional strategies to address stormwater pollution and expand the use of green infrastructure in Puget Sound cities and towns by working with communities, nonprofit organizations, governments, utilities, and the science community. She seeks to advance the policies, practices, and sciences necessary to bring more nature into cities in ways that clean water and air and support human well-being. Chris is going to speak about a project currently underway to better understand the tree canopy in central Puget Sound's urban areas. And with that, Chris, take it away.
Okay, thanks so much, Ani. Everyone can hear me okay? All right, so thanks again. Again, I'm Chris Hilton. I'm the Urban Partnerships Director at the Nature Conservancy. And I want to thank Aaron and Stewardship Partners and the Planning Committee for persevering through this challenging time. I am really, really missing seeing you all in person, but so glad that we've found a way to use tools to be together and learn from each other anyway. So the project I'm going to talk about is one which I'm hoping will be helpful to many of you, and that is an assessment of the urban tree canopy in Puget Sound. I'm trying advancing the slides here. I'm going to give it a second. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right, once it gets going, I think it'll speed up. So most of us attending the summit are here because we believe in the power of nature to help us resolve many of the challenges our society faces today, most particularly a clean and safe environment for all. You probably decided to check out this particular presentation because, like me, you might believe that trees can play a really critical role in the health of our environment and therefore the health of our communities in Puget Sound. So over the last few years, my team at the Conservancy has been thinking about how we might be able to provide regional support to the protection and enhancement of the urban tree canopy in Puget Sound. And in talking with a number of organizations and agencies, one thing we've heard fairly consistently is that communities and cities want to better understand what tree canopy we currently have and how it's contributing to the community, as well as where the gaps are. There tends to be a lot of general knowledge about the neighborhoods where trees exist, where there are more trees or less trees. We tend to know that wealthy communities have a higher percentage tree canopy, and low income or neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color tend to have lower percentage tree canopies. But a lot of communities just don't have a high level of detail on their tree canopy. And in fact, gathering and analyzing data related to tree canopy can be prohibitively expensive for many cities. So back in about 2017, we got together with a number of partners and were able to secure a grant to better understand the urban canopy in Puget Sound. And there are many partners involved and impacted. The partners directly involved in the grant itself are ourselves, the Nature Conservancy, American Forests, City Forest Credits, the Washington Department of Natural Resources Urban and Community Forest Program is the funder of the project through the U.S. Forest Service Landscape Scale Resilience Program. And finally, the Davy Tree Expert Company is a consultant we're working with to gather and analyze much of the data. So as you all know, our cities tend to leave little room for nature in many cases. And as the population in our region grows, open space is being developed to accommodate that growth, and our urban canopy continues to be lost. Beyond that, management strategies are inconsistent across the region, and funding to protect and steward the urban tree canopy is often minimal and targeted at the areas with not targeted at the areas with the greatest need for ecosystem services. So our vision was to provide data and tools that foster a healthy urban forest in central Puget Sound, an urban forest that produces multiple benefits, including reducing stormwater pollution, improving air quality, capturing carbon, expanding urban habitat, providing human well-being benefits, and providing equitable access to those benefits. Our very specific goal was to create a central Puget Sound assessment based on the best available science for use by organizations and cities and counties in order to support prioritizing spending in places where it provides the greatest benefit, and further to provide benefit to those communities who would like to pursue urban carbon markets as a revenue source for stewardship, which I'll mention again later. The geographic scope of the project is the urban growth boundary of Pierce, King, and Snohomish counties. We and the other partners involved really tried to manhandle the budgets to cover the entire region, but ultimately, given the amount we were able to apply for in the grant, we decided to focus on the 3 most populous counties with the greatest amount of impervious surfaces, which is why we landed on Pierce, King, and Snohomish. And we do hope to expand this to the rest of the urban areas in Puget Sound in the future. So the project builds off some really fantastic work being done. The city of Seattle released high resolution canopy data within the last couple of years. King Conservation District, with support from Forterra and others, has worked with a number of cities in King County to provide them with high quality data. And part of our intent was really to ensure consistent data across the region and get our urban areas all kind of to the same level of data that the city of Seattle is working with, so that we can support regional decision making and really see our urban tree canopy as a regional asset in addition to a local asset within each city and community. So our process, we're working through a number of steps in the project, and we are in the first step right now, which is the gathering and creating of data. So we are using the data that already existed, as I mentioned, from City of Seattle and the King Conservation District projects, and creating new data for the areas in King, Snohomish, and Pierce County that were not covered in the work done by those entities. So again, Davy Resource Group is our consultant, and they have been busy over the last many months mapping out tree cover, including canopy cover versus understory, impervious surfaces, open waters, and bare land. In Mike Carey's presentation following mine, you'll see some more examples of what that data does look like, and some great examples from Tacoma of how they're using the data that they have. So we're at the tail end of finishing data creation. What you're seeing here is the start of a story map that will be made publicly in the next several weeks to a month. And certainly all the data will be open source and available by use for anyone. So once the data is all gathered, we'll be transitioning to looking at the ecosystem services of the urban tree canopy. So we'll be using the iTree suite of tools to do custom runs of that ecosystem services modeling software to produce regional ecosystem services valuations and quantification reports. Of course, there are a limited number of ecosystem services we'll be able to run at this time, and we really want to make sure we effectively capture what is of the highest interest to potential users. So with that in mind, we have a poll for you. Lynn, do you want to put up the poll? So the question we're asking is about, which ecosystem services would be of most interest to your work. So I'll give folks a slow 15 to 20 seconds to think about this and respond. Okay, so hopefully everyone has a chance to respond, and I'm excited to see what your input is. Oh, great, we got, shocking news. Everyone here is interested in stormwater. Lots of interest also in access to green space, human health. Very cool. Thanks so much. That'll be really useful. So following the ecosystem services valuation, we'll be developing some tools that will support folks who want to use this data. So this specifically includes simple guides to using the data with a particular focus on how to prioritize and identify projects for tree planting given your specific ecosystem service of interest. We'll also be creating some tools related to climate resilience and species selection appropriate to the current climate models in the Puget Sound region. And then finally, our partner organization, City Forest Credits, is going to be using the data, and we'll have an opportunity for a number of jurisdictions to work with them to identify projects and prepare them for the carbon credit market that City Forest Credits manages here in the Northwest. Many of you have probably heard seen some presentations by that organization and some of the projects they've worked on. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm waiting for this to go ahead. Okay, there we go. So our timeline, this is a 2-year project, and although we're nearing the end of the first year, the data creation has been the most significant body of work. So as we enter this second year, we'll be transitioning in the next couple months to working on the ecosystem services valuation and then development of tools. As I mentioned, we'll be really interested in ensuring that those tools and the ecosystem service valuation responds to the need that folks have in the community here. So many of you have already heard from me to get your thoughts on what might be valuable, and I'm sure I will be reaching out to others, and I look forward to hearing from anyone who has an interest in learning more about this. As I mentioned, we'll be fairly widely distributing the data and ensuring that's available and easy to use. Ultimately, we want to be creating a data set and tool that provides stakeholders in tools to support protecting the tree canopy and the benefits that it provides, and identifying specific opportunities to improve the tree canopy in ways that provide multiple benefits to communities. So with that in mind, we will be increasingly communicating about this project and look forward to sharing the data with you, sharing these tools in the coming month and year. And I will head over to the Q&A to look at what questions there might be. And I'm also happy to chat with anyone and have provided my email address here for those that are interested in discussing further. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. As we transition to our next speaker, I wanted to make a comment about hoping we'll have some time at the end to also answer questions as a panel. So, but before that, we'll just go through all the talks and try to make a little bit of time at the back end. So our next speaker is Mike Carey. And he, as the Urban Forest Program Manager for the City of Tacoma, is responsible for managing programs and developing policy to enhance the city's tree canopy cover. Mike has a background in landscape architecture, restoration ecology, and arboriculture, and has been working with green infrastructure for the city's Environmental Services Department since 2011. In 2019, Tacoma adopted an urban forest management plan, defined a shared vision and roadmap for our community's trees. Defining a shared vision and roadmap. This urban forest management plan addresses themes such as equity and accessibility, community engagement and stewardship, canopy health, climate resiliency, ecosystem services, and resourcing. This presentation will illustrate how communities can use data in unique ways to drive long-term urban forest policy and support responsive and adaptive community-based programs. Thank you, Mike. We're looking forward to hearing your talk.
All right, thanks for that warm introduction, Ani. Can everybody hear me all right? Thumbs up. All right, great, thank you. So once again, my name is Mike Carey. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I work for the City of Tacoma as the Urban Forest Program Manager there. And I also wanted to second Chris's sentiments earlier with her presentation about being grateful that even with the lively current situation, we're still all able to gather around and talk as leaders in the industry and share ideas and resources with one another. So I think this is a unique opportunity for me to have probably more people than I've ever had in the comfort of my own kitchen dining area here. All that I ask is that if you communicate to others about this presentation, you say that the appetizer spread was on point, my tree puns were excellent, and that the music was well chosen. So thank you very much for your consideration. I have a reputation to uphold here. Moving on, I have the opportunity today. I wanted to say thank you to Aaron and Stewardship Partners and the other host committee members for inviting me here to speak today about a project that I've been working on for the better part of the last 2 years. It's kind of interesting thinking about it now as past tense, but we have a whole future of implementation in front of us. So I'm really excited, looking forward to that as well. I would be remiss here if I didn't take a moment to provide some gratitude to the rest of the folks. And I'm hoping here the slide will advance in just a moment. Here we go. So I had the opportunity to work on this project with a whole suite of amazing partners, not least of which is I had a partner here with Chris Pfeiffer from Planet Geo, who was a project manager, and working under him were a few consultants, Steve Duh with Conservation Techniques, and John Bornsworth with Peninsula Environmental Group. We also had the opportunity to work with Tacoma Tree Foundation, which is a local tree-based nonprofit working in Tacoma. And they were a phenomenal resource in really deeply engaging the community using all their existing relationships. And these are all partners that we would not have been able to have the successes that we had on this project without them involved. So I wanted to just show some gratitude there for a moment. Okay, so today I'll be focusing again on the Urban Forest Management Plan for Tacoma, but specifically driving into some of the issues around data analysis and ways that communities can take similar actions through their own jurisdictions to help to define a vision for their urban forest. So why would you as a community consider wanting an urban forest management plan? So I can speak to Tacoma, and maybe some of these issues will resonate with the rest of you who are tuning in today. It really allowed us the platform to help to define a vision for our urban forest in Tacoma. Since about 1927, we have adopted various policies and codes and procedures throughout Tacoma for how we interact with trees in our community, how we provide that level of service. And it's really been kind of a piecemeal process over those years. This really allowed us the opportunity to step back and help to define a vision for our entire community and look at all the components of our urban forest. It also gave us a platform for our community voice. It gave us a reason, another reason I should say, to engage with the community and figure out what their issues and concerns are and how we can provide that better level of service. It also gives us the opportunity to talk to some conflicts in code and policy. I'm sure that there are jurisdictional partners out there that may help, resonate with this specific component. There may be conflicts in policy and how we administer policies and what codes may be prevailing over others. And it really gave us, again, that platform to daylight some of those important policy decisions to those people that can make those decisions, specifically elected officials and other community members that have some say here, and help to weigh and figure out what's really important for the community. It also helped us to clarify some roles and responsibilities and how we administer codes and policies. And then more specifically, and really, really important to this project, was how we address disproportionate resources. There was a conversation that you may have had the opportunity to tune into last week, the social impacts presentation that was a week ago Wednesday, where there was great discussion about how in communities, often there are disproportionate resources. And some of those social determinants of health, again, impacting different populations based on their proximity to green spaces and other green assets. So we really want to be mindful of that during the development of this process. So why else? So Chris had mentioned the great work that she's doing with her partners on developing the tree canopy cover for the Puget Sound region. We had the opportunity back in 2018 to have our canopy cover assessed, and it was assessed at about 20% tree canopy, which at the time when we did this process, out of all the other jurisdictional partners who have assessed their tree canopy, we were dead last in the region. So sharing that information with council, with our community, with other people, it really provided an opportunity for us to step up. Again, we have these policies as a city that we appreciate green space and all the value that it provides our community. And this gave us a platform to show folks that it is really important. And if we ever want to achieve greater canopy cover for Tacoma and get back on par with the rest of the Puget Sound, we have to start making some decisions about resources. So the process here. So again, I spent the better part of the last 2 years working on this project. I'm only going to drill into some specific things around data at this point during this conversation because it's on brand with kind of the topics that we're all discussing today. But just know that there's a lot more information available online, and I'm happy to have any follow-up discussions with that as well. It was a little bit humbling trying to fit 2 years worth of process into one slide here, but there's a couple bullets here, and these are just the main points of development. So it all started with reviewing existing plans and policies that we have in Tacoma, as well as regional policies, to figure out if there were inconsistencies, things we're doing particularly well, things we can do better on. We conducted staff interviews with all of our staff involved in tree-related processes in Tacoma, and I cannot stress enough how important that is. We did some urban forestry benchmarking analysis to figure out what other jurisdictions surrounding us are doing, as well as across the United States. And we did some in-depth data analysis that I'll discuss some more of here in just a few slides. All of this during the process, we engaged the community. And again, I wanted to thank our partners in doing so. We had a lot of opportunities to get the voice and opinions of folks that we work with in our community, and it really helped to shape the output of this process. So going through that, we crunched all of this data and put it into what's called the Urban Forestry Sustainability Management Audit, which is a tool developed by the Forest Service, which allows cities to rate how they're doing on the sustainability of their urban forestry practices. That kind of culminates in this phase 1 research phase. And then out of that came this phase 2 action plan, where we took all of that data and we determined actions that we can take as a community to provide that better level of service and get more green into our community. I do have to say I'm going to end my presentation with a bit of a cliffhanger. I'm not going to dive too deep into that because it is specific to Tacoma's data. But if you're interested in our actions specifically, feel free to check out the website. It's tacomatreeplan.org. I mentioned how important it is to have those conversations with your own internal workforce. These people are tied to the work. It is part of their everyday. And you can find some extraordinarily enlightening information just by engaging people in conversation. So we looked through our entire city org chart, and we defined there were 10 different departments and 25 different work groups operating around some level of urban forestry engagement, whether that's how we deal with hazardous trees, how we help private development through the design process, tree permitting for planting and removals, how we involve in education and outreach, many topics here. Just by having these conversations, we had 6 workshops, each were about 3 hours long, and we invited people during these different processes into the room. And these are the 6 different categories of conversations we had here on your screen. We had some phenomenal revelations about process improvements, people having a better understanding of other people's body of work just by getting people into the same room to have conversations. And from that, we've had great process improvements, helping our permitting staff and private development through technical glitches and otherwise. Lots of process improvements around code enforcement and hazardous trees, again, just by getting folks into the same room to have a discussion. All right, jumping into the data here. So Chris had mentioned earlier how important tree canopy cover is, just to have a firm understanding or a way to compare yourself across your geography as a city or across the Puget Sound region or across the United States. We again had this opportunity to do a tree canopy assessment in 2018 through the city. And another important part to mention here too is that by having this tree canopy assessed, there's lots of other pieces of data you can pull from that assessment. On the left-hand side here, you'll see our tree canopy cover sitting at 20%, but we also have broken down our other land cover categories into different categories here. So 40% of the city, for instance, is other impervious surface, which has implications about our stormwater system and how we help to manage that stormwater and that flow. We can break down buildings, non-canopy vegetation, soil, and all of that can help us to decipher what is plantable space, versus not plantable. So should we want to increase our urban tree canopy, where can we go to find those available spaces? One of the greatest revelations, I think, in getting this level of analysis is the inclusion in our Tacoma Equity Index. A lot of jurisdictions across the United States are developing these tools for equity and engagement to help to map out a city in terms of accessibility for resources, proximity to green space, and a lot of those social determinants for health. The city of Tacoma has what's called the Equity Index, and it's a mapping tool that's interactive, and you can define different parameters there. And we were actually able to add tree canopy coverage into this equity index for the city. You can drill in on the census tract level, and you can figure out what your community's tree canopy coverage is and how that may impact your access and your social determinants of health again. Another interesting thing you can pull from a tree canopy analysis is the concept of tree height. So you can actually isolate your tree canopy layer, and you can break it up into different categories of tree height. There are a lot of communities across the Pacific Northwest that are considering things in the regulations like a heritage tree ordinance or perhaps a tree preservation ordinance that may have implications for tree height or size. So if you're able to, again, drill into this type of analysis, you can kind of see across your geography who might be impacted by those types of regulations or by those preservation ordinances. So this has been a critical tool for Tacoma, looking at if we're going to have some kind of a voluntary heritage tree program, where we might be looking to do education and outreach about that, maybe enlist people, and then also how it's going to impact our community as a whole. Some other data points here that we brought into our analysis, this conversation around safety, air quality, and urban heat. Again, I'm not going to dive too much into this because some of it was stressed in that social impacts presentation last week. But I do want to mention 3 specific data points that the city was able to pull into our analysis. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see we have a map of our youth collisions that had happened since 2010, and it's overlaid with our safe routes to school walking maps. And from that, we can figure out if we want to up our maintenance game. Maybe we would like to plant more trees within those corridors because trees have been seen for their traffic calming purposes. We also might prioritize maintenance there to make sure that there's adequate visibility so that the kids walking down the streets getting to school, they're not blocked visibility-wise to the vehicles that are going to be interfering with them. We also had the opportunity to conduct an air quality study that was done recently in 2018, and we deployed a whole bunch of air quality sensors all across the city of Tacoma. This provides real-time data, and we can figure out where the air quality is poor or better across the geography of Tacoma. And with that, again, it could have implications for tree planting for an air quality purpose. On the right-hand side here, you'll see a map, and this is just a snapshot in time of one day. We were able to engage with Portland State University recently in a study where we actually deployed a fleet of vehicles that drove across the city during a heat wave. We drove in the early morning, in the afternoon, and the evening, and we were able to see what the heat fluctuation was over the period of a day during a heat wave. And so from that mapping exercise, we can figure out what areas of the city actually have more susceptibility to this dynamic fluctuation in heat. And again, from a tree perspective, we can help to tailor where we're planting trees to help with those insulative capacities to help reduce that impact of urban heat. We also had a fair amount of community engagement during this process, but I wanted to pull in two data points that maybe folks may not think is kind of an obvious way to engage in the interests of the community. So we actually log all of our phone calls that come into the city, specifically to the urban forestry hotline, but as well as through our customer service line. And we can figure out what people are talking to us about, what their concerns are, if they're reporting and asking for services, and where they're at throughout the city. So through this type of analysis, we can figure out, again, what people's interests are. You know, we may have assumptions that a lot of people call about hazardous trees, but in reality, maybe people are calling because they want basic maintenance requests. We can also see who's calling us. And you can see on the map here on the right-hand side that we have a fair density of people calling in the inner part of the city, but on the outskirts, we don't have a whole lot of engagement. And that may be because they don't have concerns, maybe our canopy is in a better condition out there, or maybe they don't feel particularly connected to Tacoma, to government specifically. So it allows us the opportunity to figure out other ways that we can engage those stakeholders, those people, and figure out what matters to them. This is going to get really granular here, and I apologize in advance, but we also have a tree inventory that's accessible to the public at the city. It's through a platform called Tree Plotter. And so this is not all of our city's trees by any means, but it is a random sampling of trees throughout the city, as well as trees in our business districts and our downtown core and some other areas. And through this point-by-point tree inventory, we can actually do analyses to figure out what our distribution of species is, what our size, health, and condition are, if there are any observed defects. This helps us to get an understanding of the health and condition of our city's trees to figure out if we need to have improvements to tree planting species, let's say, or maybe an improved maintenance plan, or maybe specific geographic areas where we need to provide additional resources. Okay, so that was a whole lot of data that we did on the front end, just looking at analysis, existing point statistics, things about our canopy cover. We also wanted to talk a little bit about how we're currently engaging with our community through our incentive programs. We host a tree coupon program here at the City of Tacoma that we've been doing since 2012. And this offers a partnership between the City of Tacoma, our residents, and local nurseries. So if you go online, you can apply for a tree coupon. We'll mail it to you in the mail. You can take that into the nursery, and then at the point of sale, you can get $30 off your tree purchase, up to 5 trees per coupon. So through this program, again, it started with humble beginnings in 2012. We didn't see huge distribution here. I'm actually going to do a little bit of a time lapse so you can see the tree coupon uptake. On the left-hand side, you'll see a zoomed in City of Tacoma map. And during the same time frame on the right-hand side, you'll see the tree coupons as they were redeemed throughout Pierce County. This is a Pierce County-wide program here. So again, humble beginnings. You can slowly start to see the expansion over the years, 2016, 17, 18, and our final year, 2019. We're actually able to see not just the quantity of trees planted, but then also the spatial distribution of where these trees are going across our community. Our personal goal here is to paint Pierce County green. I think we've gone a lot of ways to go, but we've actually, through this program, again, since we started in 2012, we've distributed about 4,500 trees across Pierce County. What's important here to call out is that this one-size-fits-all program, where it's fairly low on administrative burden for the city, where we're seeing those trees go specifically in Tacoma, is that about 30% of those trees are redeemed in our low opportunity neighborhoods. those are those areas we're trying to target for, again, improvements to tree canopy. Because as the tree canopy map showed earlier, there's this disproportionality between where trees are going in our community and who's being serviced by those ecosystem services. So in this catch-all program, again, 30% redemption is really going into those neighborhoods we're trying to prioritize. I want to show you this other program that we run called Grit City Trees, which is a free tree giveaway program. And through this program, we actually go and do a lot of door knocking. We show up to community events. We have a lot of community participants and within these neighborhoods. And the premise of this program is really based on community building through tree planting. We ask that neighbors get together and provide an application for the program as a set of neighbors, get people talking, it gets people improving their neighborhood as a community. In this program, by providing that tailored hands-on approach, here's another time lapse here, you can see where these trees are being distributed specifically in Tacoma. And just last year alone, we had about 154 people in our community participate, about 500 trees planted, and 279 of those trees went to, again, our low opportunity neighborhoods or our target neighborhoods. That's about a 61% rate in our low opportunity neighborhoods. So kind of wrapping it full circle, the reason why I'm presenting this data here is because you can see that by providing a catch-all program where everybody can participate that has the resources to drive to a nursery, to pay the rest of the cost for a tree, they actually have the ability to take that tree home and plant it. You're getting about a 30% redemption rate within your priority neighborhoods. But if you really want to have trees go into areas that need them the most, it requires a little bit more of a hands-on approach, like the Grit City Trees program. And you can see that redemption rate dramatically shift. Okay, so what did we do with all that data? Again, I'm just providing a little snapshot of some of the data sets we used here. There's a lot more that goes into it. Culminating that phase 1 research, we put everything into what I mentioned earlier was this urban forestry sustainability and management audit. There's all these different criteria across your urban forestry sustainability matrix. And they use different factors like, existing plans and policies. Here's the categories here. And you're able to rate yourself on your sustainability practices. You can see down on the bottom here, the city of Tacoma rated at about 77% based on our existing operations. From all that information, you can actually develop an action plan, which again, it's going to be a little bit of a cliffhanger here. I'm hoping to use this as a template for you guys to engage in. But we were able to develop specific actions around some of these different categories to improve our sustainability working in the future in our forest. Things like management policy, how we fund and provide authority, risk and disaster planning, which is something that I didn't realize we were very unprepared for here in the city. I think that's something that may resonate with a lot of people in the current state of affairs. Talking about capacity and training, do you have the opportunity to even help to manage those workflows coming in? And then what our inventories and plans are, and then how we engage the community effectively. So I invite you all to check out our final plan on tacomatreeplan.org. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have during the Q&A session here. Thank you for the time again, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the presentations.
Thank you, Mike. I want to transition to our next speaker. Mike, there are some questions in the Q&A too, if you want to take a look. Our next speaker is Keunyea Song, and she is a stormwater monitoring scientist at Ecology, the Washington State Department of Ecology. She manages the Stormwater Action Monitoring Program, and the SAM programs are for Western Washington municipal stormwater permittees. SAM has developed and implemented stormwater receiving water monitoring in Puget Sound. SAM also evaluates individual stormwater management practices and informs permittees and Ecology. Today, she's going to talk about how Ecology encourages and accounts for the benefits of trees and forest management. You're muted.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now? All right, good. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And then thanks, Annie, for the introductions. And then thanks, Chris and then Mike, for your great presentations. It actually set up nicely the introduction for me. By giving the importance of the tree canopy, multiple benefits, not just the stormwater, and then also different ways to protect the tree canopies, and then using the data set and the tools. So that was great to hear. And it was also very interesting, especially to me, the poll, the result that Chris played. It was very interesting to see that 80% of the people here in these sessions were interested in the hydrological benefit of trees, how we can use trees for the stormwater management. So that was very interesting. And then that is the topic that I'm actually gonna talk about today. So in these presentations, I'm gonna focus on the tree functions related to the stormwater. So how much of the rain tree can capture and then reduce the stormwater volume, and then how ecology apply this information into stormwater management. Again, my name is Keunyea, and I am the Stormwater Action Monitoring Scientist at the Department of Ecology. Okay. I'm trying to move the slide.
Keunyea, you may need to click the screen first and then try to advance with the left and right arrows. I think that's going to work. There.
There you go. Okay, so we know that in the urban conditions, the most of rainfalls, about over 90% of rainfall just flows as a runoff in the impervious surface, and then they will move really fast through the area, and then eventually the flow discharge into the downstreams, and that causes lots of water problems, stormwater problems, including floodings, and then it has the stream bank erosion issues, and then also different type of pollution issues too, and then also impaired the habitats for the aquatic ecosystems. Ooh, doesn't work. I think it's just slow in my computer. Oh, okay. Yeah, so having trees, especially in the urban settings, can reduce the runoff volume by these different the tree processes, including interceptions, evapotranspirations, infiltration, and evaporation that you already know. And then it will eventually reduce the runoff volume and then mitigate the stormwater impact in the area and also downstreams. So the question I have, and that you might have also, is what is the quantity that the tree can actually reduce the runoff volumes? So there are many previous studies actually measure those effectiveness of trees, and then also the very specific processes, individual processes. And then I'm here showing you some of the literatures actually measure the interceptions. And then you can here see that some of the study was done in the Western Cascade, Washington, and then Oregon. And then based on those studies, you can see that around 18% to 25% of rainfall can be reduced just by interceptions by coniferous and then deciduous trees in this area. And then these three studies measure the transpirations. And then here again, we included the Pacific Northwest study, and then it shows that about 10% of rainfall could be reduced by trees, by coniferous. And then some other locations, New Hampshire shows about 25% of reduction of rainfall by deciduous trees, which is a pretty large amount of the volume. And then another processes that we focused is the infiltration, and then the evaporation starting from the infiltrated the water. I don't have the exact volume reduction here, but here you can see that the tree roots penetrate the subsoil, and then it increased average infiltration about 27 times. So having just a tree can increase the infiltration to 27 times more compared to the unplanted control soils, which is a very large number. So based on those, all combine these individual processes together, that we could estimate about 30% to 80% of the rainfall could be reduced just by the tree processes alone. So that means the 30% to 60% of runoff reductions that we can get by having trees in a forest or more mature conditions of forest conditions. So the next question, and then I want to focus on here, is then how does ecology use this information? How ecology value and then consider these hydrologic benefits that trees have in the stormwater management? So that will be the focus for this talk. The ecology has two pillars for stormwater regulations and the management. And the first one is, of course, the stormwater permit. And then the permit has the list of the requirements related to the stormwater quality and then quantity management. And then another piece will be the stormwater management manual, which describes the different ways to properly manage stormwater, and then also describe how to comply with the permits. And then the stormwater management manual is the place that you can find the information how ecology calculate this hydrological budget of the tree. So in the manual, it was mentioned in the introduction part here by stating that tree and then other vegetative cover can reduce about 40% of rainfall just by evapotranspirations. And then the manual introduction also mentions about the benefit of infiltration, absorptions, and then eventually it's gonna reduce the stream peak flow. So it will have, the tree will have the flow control benefit for the stormwater part. So we are actually giving the benefit, tree benefit for the stormwater control. So the technical part, we are actually calculating the hydrologic benefit is using the hydrology model that the manual required to use. In Western Washington, the people are required to use WWHM, HSPFs, or other continuous modeling. And then Eastern Washington, permittees are required to use a single event model. And then this diagram is an example of the conceptual the flow in the pervious land of the HSPF and then WWHM. And then here you can see that actual three individual functions are already built in this model, including infiltrations, and then the soil storage, and evapotranspirations, and then interception storage. It was already built in this model. And then this is the initial, the value that we, the WWHM get entered into as infiltration and interception, and then evapotranspirations as our initial value. And here you don't have to worry too much about the actual numbers, but I want to just point out that not just the forest and other pervious land cover, including pasture and the lawn, will get some functions entered in for infiltration, interception, and evapotranspirations. So we are giving the benefit of the hydrologic benefit of trees using this WWHM model. So to make it a little easier for you guys to understand, I actually ran 4 different scenarios for this tree credit, tree benefit. And then the first scenario is before the development, pre-development conditions. So I just put, let's say it is 100 acre of the project site. So those are all forested condition. And then we can look at the scenario 4, which is the another extreme end of the scenario. And that means this 100 acre of a forest is completely converted into the whole impervious surface, which is the road. So it becomes the road 100 acre. And then these are the 2 extreme ends. And then the scenario 2 and scenario 3 will be the case that has some tree retentions. So I want to make the scenario more realistic. So I put the 10% of canopy retention, which is the 10 acre of canopy. So scenario 2 will be the 10%. Scenario 2 will be the 10 acre of canopy is in the entered as a forest condition. So that means the 90 acre will be the impervious condition, impervious cover development. And then scenario 3 will be slightly different. So I still have the 10 acre of canopy, but 50 of the canopy was overhanging into the impervious surface, which is something like the picture here is showing in the right side. So the left side, the picture will be the 100% of canopy is in the pervious area, which is the scenario 2. And then scenario 3 will be just 50% of the canopy is in the pervious, and then other 50 is in the impervious cover. So that means we enter the acre area for forest 5 acre, and then they get to develop 95 acre as an impervious road. So I simulated the model for 60-year hydrology simulations, and then calculate the runoff, total runoff, cumulative runoff volume. So if you don't have any tree retentions, this is how much runoff that you get. And then you can see the reduced runoff volume by having just 10% of the tree canopies. And in WWHM simulation, and then in the Western Washington, not just Western Washington, Washington Stormwater Management Manual, reduced runoff means the reduced BMP size that people have to implement. So that could be cost beneficial for the people because they can have the smaller size BMP. And in addition to this, using the WWHM, the Ecology also provide a tree credit, additional tree credit by allowing this tree as a separate BMP type called tree retention and then tree planting. And then that is the BMP number T516. And then if you get the certain credit for tree retention and then tree planting based on your tree type and then your canopy area. And then once you calculate this tree credit, and then this credit, tree credit can be used to reduce your total impervious surface area that could be entered into the model. So I'm gonna show you how that works. So this is basically the same scenario that I just showed you, having the total 100 acre of the forest condition or the road conditions. And then we assume that 10 acre of canopy can be retained. So if this 10 acre of canopy is the evergreen tree, you get the 20% of the canopy area as a credit, which become 2 acre of tree credits. And then you can subtract this 2 acre from your impervious surface. So actual impervious surface you have is a 90 acre for scenario 2, but you are able to enter 88 by applying this 2 acre as a tree credit. So you will get the reduced impervious cover as well for the scenario 2 and then scenario 3. And because of these reductions of impervious cover, of course, you're gonna get further reduction of the runoff volume. Again, this reduced the runoff volume means the reduced the BMP sizes for the people. And this is the recent study done in 2019. And then this study compared the tree credit that we are giving using the WWHM and then tree credit system, the BMP we have in the manual with the I3 model, which is more sophisticated and then tree hydrology focused model. And then when they compare the tree benefit by tree hydro benefit, they simulated a scenario having 20% of canopy increase from the existing conditions for different the city canopy conditions now. And then here you can see the runoff reductions that they estimated. So based on this, the result, we found that WWHM is actually giving more, almost a double, twice more benefit of the tree than iTree can estimate. So based on those results, we are pretty confident and comfortable that how much stormwater mitigation benefit that the manual is giving is generous. And yeah, it could be even more than what other model can estimate. So we are pretty comfortable with the numbers and our tools that we are having. But of course, there is always room for improvement and then discussions. So the possible improvement and then limitation of the current the tree credit that we are having could be like this. So first, although we feel like we are giving enough credit, and then by doing this, we try to encourage people to use it, but we've been told that the tree credit BMP hasn't been widely used, and we don't know the reason clearly yet. So we are thinking maybe the reduced size of BMP by using this tree credit might not be really cost effective compared to all the difficulties and the hassles that people have to go through during the construction period. Or these, instead of retaining the BMP, they could use this area as additional development. So they might be more the beneficial for them economically. So that could be one possibility, but we haven't actually had the information about this. And then another concern actually the Ecology has about this credit system is this credit is made for, so we are basically giving this credit for as a forest conditions, but sometimes the urban trees are not really healthy and then they may not live long. So we are actually thinking of providing more detail, the maintenance requirement, and then proper spacing, and then soil type or soil depth they have to have. So that could be the additional requirement that we may want to include in the future for the tree BMP sections. And then as I presented before earlier, this tree credit system is all based on the literature review and then synthesis of this review, these papers. So having local data about this tree hydrologic benefit would be very critical. And then that will be the time that we can reevaluate the tree credit systems. So that there is actually the one project going to calculate and then quantify the stormwater benefit of the local trees. And then this study was funded by SAM program, the Stormwater Action Monitoring, driven by the municipal, Western Washington municipal permittees, stormwater permittees. And then I believe this will be done by end of next year or maybe a little bit later. But once we get the more detailed information about local tree benefits, then we will have the open discussion about how to encourage people better to use this, the BMP as a tool, stormwater management tools. Okay, that's all.
Hey, thank you, Keunyea. There are, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, try to be quick about my part of this presentation. So 3 of us are going to be co-presenting the last presentation in this session. My fellow co-presenters are Dylan Fischer and Ben Leonard. I want to clarify that this is only a year's worth of data, and this is from the SAM project that Keunyea just talked about. So it's very preliminary, but the data are pretty interesting, and I'm sure you'll all dig it as you see it. We were getting requests for data before we even started collecting it, so we know there's a lot of thirst for this information, and we hope that this is interesting to you all. And I want to be sure that I can control this. All right, let me back up one there. So I want to say thank you all for sticking around, and I'll be quick again. My co-presenters, Dylan Fischer is a forest ecosystems ecologist and a faculty member at the Evergreen State College. He obtained both his doctorate and master's degrees in forest science at Northern Arizona University. His research in ecosystem and forest ecology addresses community change and variation in fluxes and pools of carbon, nutrients, and water in ecosystems. Ben Leonard, the other co-presenter, is a graduate student in WSU School of the Environment, and he's pursuing a PhD in environmental and natural resource sciences. Ben loves gadgets, gizmos, technology, large data wrangling, and most importantly, the luscious forests of Western Washington. He was the perfect person for this work, and he's done most of the heavy lifting on this project. Ben has a bachelor's degree from Evergreen. So beyond the three of us, Jamie Duberstein is a collaborator from Clemson University, and he's not here online, but he's, I'm sure, with us in spirit. There are a whole host of other people that are critical to this project, and I want to make sure that I thank them. Lyndon Lampman and Abby Barnes are from the Department of Natural Resources. They are the project managers for this project, and Lyndon recently retired and Abby's taken over. Department of Ecology and Keunyea for managing this project from their perspective, and especially a big thanks to Sam for the funding. Technicians Carly Thompson and Brandon Boyd, you guys are awesome. Hopefully you're listening. Thank you for all that you've done. And then a whole host of students, Spencer Vieira, Paul Silberman, Jay Jones, Hawk, Chris Nolte, Ryan Bartlett, and the Evergreen's ground staff. I also want to give a big shout out to Mike Carey, because it was his inspiration for us to start even thinking on these lines of measuring the use of water by trees. You know, the reason that I wanted to show this slide was that it shows just shows canopy cover across the United States, and this is focused in on the Puget Sound area. It's a lot coarser than the other urban canopy covers that Chris and Mike talked about. But what it shows is that if you look at the urban areas, which are the areas hatched in pink, we don't have a lot of tree cover in those urban areas as expectedly. The red blotches and the yellow blotches are where we've had a lot of housing developments come in the last 17 years. The red circle is where WSU Puyallup, where we're based, and the green dots are the sites where we've done a lot of this study. So clearly a lot of trees are being removed still for development. I saw a comment come in. It's clearly not what it used to be historically, and people are definitely being more aware of the value of trees and are trying to be more careful about it. But the reality in many places, especially on the fringes of urban development, like what we see out here in Puyallup, that scenario, what you see in the bottom, is quite the common scenario. When that development goes in, most of the trees get taken out. In fact, all the trees get taken out. And a lot of the older stands are completely decimated. So we were wondering, well, surely there has to be some value for some of these older trees, and how do we better incentivize the retention of these older trees in housing developments? And, you know, granted, developing around trees is very complicated. It's a lot easier for the developer to go in and remove trees, but I know I've been part of trainings with developers, and many are very keen to retain trees as they go through the development process, just as they know people are interested in their retention. Right, so this is the speed introduction. Keunyea did a lot of this, so I'm going to skip it. But I wanted to focus on how we kind of break the tree down into its various hydrologic components. And this is a great graphic I found on the Green Infrastructure Center site. And so what we're looking at is we're focusing on the main hydrologic components of essentially rainfall and how much of rainfall a tree manages over time. So we're looking at precipitation and canopy interception. Precipitation is rainfall, as you all probably know. we're looking at through fall and stem flow. So through fall is the water that goes right through the tree canopy and falls on the ground below the tree. And then stem flow is the water that's funneled by the leaves and the branches down the trunk of the tree down to its base. And then finally, the parts that we see, infiltration is, is what goes into the soils. But the part that we see and is manifested in the urban streams and waterways around us is what we call runoff. And typically it's surface runoff, which is in our case, the big culprit. That's the one that brings the most amount of water to the stream systems that basically cannot handle those huge influxes of water. The other problem with surface runoff, and this is specifically to urban ecosystems, is that surface runoff is what brings all those pollutants and toxins to the stream system and devastates the aquatic ecology. So we had this strong sense, and we, from all the literature and all the work that's been done before, that trees play a critical role in how much runoff is managed in an urban landscape. And as Keunyea mentioned, how can we incentivize or add credit to trees based on locally derived information? Conveniently, all these data and all these components add up to some very neat hydrologic budget information. And so that's what we collect. We collect precipitation, transpiration, stem flow, through fall, changes in soil moisture, and all of that will basically give us a sense of how much of runoff comes off a development site in an urban landscape. We have, the study is going to be talking about trees from 2 locations, one up at the Evergreen State College and one at a DNR facility called the Webster Farm Nursery. We have a bunch of sites with different types of trees. We're looking at 4 species of trees, and I'm going to save those for Ben and Dylan to talk about in a bit. But we have a total of 64 individual trees that we have instrumented, and they're spread over 2 sites. And we have 2 years of data collection, 1 year under our belt and 1 more year to go. And essentially what we were trying to do is quantify how much work these trees are doing from a water management perspective. We're looking at periods between storms and during storms, because those are all both very critical to how water is managed around a tree. This is some pictures of us doing some field work. And again, an incredible graphic that was developed by a graphic person at WSU Puyallup. Kind of shows how we broke the tree up and how we added various sensors to the parts of the tree to measure aspects of how water is managed. Ben, I did the speed intro. Take it away from here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Leonard. Ani did a great job of introducing me and introducing the study. I'm going to wait to get control. Looks like I've got it right here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to actually go back to Ani's previous slide. So really what I'm going to be focusing on right here is the methodology, and then I'm going to present some preliminary data results. For this, I'm going to specifically focus in on how we measured sap flow, or transpiration for that matter, as well as the through fall measurement devices we used and the stem flow measurement device that we used. So to begin, I'm going to introduce our transpiration measurement devices, which were thermal dissipation probes. We basically took each one of our trees, and for the fire adapted bark species like the Douglas fir and the western red cedar, we actually had to shave them down to the cambium layer. And I know Ani kind of skipped past the tree species portion, so I just wanted to quickly mention that our 4 tree species are the Douglas fir, the western red cedar, which are both coniferous, and then we also have the red alder and the big leaf maple, which are deciduous species. And so those are the 4 species totaling up to 64 trees. So each one of those trees had these sensors installed in the conductive layer of the tree, which is referred to as the actual sapwood right here that conducts water, as opposed to the heartwood that does not conduct water. When we installed these probes, we were trying to basically get into that juicy part of the tree where we're gonna see water movement. The way that they basically work is the top part of the probe is heated, and you measure the difference between the top and the bottom probe. As water moves up the tree, that signal is dissipated, and so the difference can actually go and give you velocity measurements for how fast water is moving. In order to basically take that measurement and get to the next level, which is going to be the actual individual tree water use, we have to actually get an idea of the sapwood area. We don't have that quite yet. We're going to actually do that towards the end of the study because it requires some destructive sampling, but that's eventually where we're heading. For now, we actually have these nice patterns of diurnal sap movement. And here I am representing the sap flux density in centimeters cubed of water over centimeters squared of sapwood per hour. This can actually be reduced to a simple velocity, maybe more of an oversimplification from a tree physiology standpoint, but that's how I'm going to be representing the data in subsequent slides. So for interception, we did 2 things. I mentioned the through-fall component, and that was actually done by making these cool troughs. You can see that Carly Thompson is actually being quite fashion-forward here, wearing a mask while we're cutting the PVC. We actually moved to HEPA filters because of the VOCs from cutting these PVC troughs. But the basic idea was that we want to maximize length and surface area to provide these transects underneath the tree's canopy. So we took 2 of these PVC 10-foot sections and arranged them in a way where we focused on the individual tree canopies. So there were sections of these trees where the canopies overlapped with others, and we were trying to basically focus the placement of these troughs underneath the individual tree's canopy, where it was then funneled into a rain gauge that was wirelessly logging tips over time, and we looked at individual rain events. We also covered the rain gauge with nylon netting to prevent needles and other things from getting in there and gunking it up, and routinely clean them out. That was a big part of field maintenance for this project, or has been and will continue to be. So for stem flow, this was really tricky actually, because usually the literature involves small trees that don't have rough bark. It's like smooth bark, small trees that you see with stem flow measurements. But as you can see right here with the Western red cedar, the bark is very uneven. There's a lot of contours. So what we ended up doing was we took some vinyl tubing, nested some plumber's insulation underneath, and sprayed foam in there, creating like these nice molds that funneled any stem flow down into a collection device. To seal these guys off, we used Flex Seal, which was quite hydrophobic, wicking water from the stem into, right here I have a rain gauge. This was kind of one of the initial designs where we thought, oh, stem flow, according to the literature, is not really that large of a component of the hydrologic budget. However, we quickly learned when scaling up that, oh, even a mason jar isn't suited. So at this point, what we ended up doing was switching to these buckets at the bottom where water was funneled into the buckets and then measured with graduated cylinders each time after a rain event. So looking at data, I'm going to start with transpiration and microclimate data. I didn't get into like the actual sensor setups for the microclimate data because it was kind of boring out of the box. Weather station and just sensors that we kind of hung in place, and there wasn't much methodology to that. So here I've got transpiration at the very bottom in terms of average daily sap flow velocity across our 4 different species. I'll show the legend in a minute that indicates which species these lines represent. But for now, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we have these individual microclimate drivers. First and foremost, there has to be water in the soil for the tree to move up its stem. That's usually not a big problem in the Northwest, except for some of these drier summer month periods. And you can see, of course, that soil moisture responds to precipitation events. And we measured soil moisture at every single plot individually, as well as our weather stations. There's over 40 individual soil moisture sensors, so I just simplified this and do an average. There's also photosynthetically activated radiation, which is the component of solar radiation that the tree is using to photosynthesize. So that's a necessary component of the transpiration budget for the trees. And then finally, trees aren't necessarily trying to get rid of water, right, when they're transpiring. They actually open their stomates to take in CO2, and the water loss, or I guess 90% of the water loss, is just driven by evaporation. In order for that to take place, there has to be a vapor pressure deficit. And so this is another driver. So for daily precipitation, because we have 2 sites, I just presented the average here, but it's important to basically see that there are differences between our 2 sites, which is great because we're really trying to, even though these sites are pretty close to each other, we're trying to get a variety of microclimate conditions so that these results are more applicable to a wider area of Western Washington. So in general, Webster receives greater volumes of water during some of these heavier rain events. However, Evergreen also is quite wet, and you can see that the volumes of water at Evergreen for some of these spring events actually exceed Webster. So it's not always that Webster is producing more rain. Next, I wanted to quickly highlight the daily sap flow velocity, which Dylan will actually talk about more in depth here. But I wanted to point out that we had initially just installed these probes at Webster. So we don't have quite an entire year of data yet. The transparency represents us not having a full data set, which is also comes into play when we had small losses in power. The points in the background are individual daily averages, while the lines represent a 7-day moving average. In general, the broadleaf species, bigleaf maple and red alder, are basically transpiring at a higher velocity during the summer. And during some of these shoulder seasons, you actually see Douglas fir and Western red cedar dominating. But Dylan will get more into that discussion. So for through fall data, I want to basically present a couple different events throughout the year. So here is late summer. And I know this is a little bit confusing here, but the purple line is the weather station data. So this is always going to add up to basically 0% interception throughout the rain event, which is all relative on the x-axis. It's basically just to kind of show that the accumulation of precipitation is not linear over time. So these rain events all look slightly different. However, you can see that in the summer, when all the trees still have their leaves, you're actually getting great canopy interception kind of across the board. And that's true for our broadleafs, as well as some of the deciduous species where, well, in addition to the evergreen species, where Western red cedar is the winner. Over time, you can see these differences magnified as our broadleaf species lose their leaves. And more recently, you can actually see that that the bigleaf maple, as it has started to experience leaf on, is also increasing its canopy interception, while red alder still hasn't produced very large leaves yet. What that looks like in terms of a 25 storm average here, I've just ranked our species where Western red cedar is in the lead over all these storms when averaged. Second place, Douglas fir. Third place is going to be bigleaf maple. And in last, red alder, which I think looking at a barren red alder canopy right here kind of shows why it might not be great at intercepting rainfall during the winter. So stem flow data. Let me quickly go over that. I use something called the stem funneling ratio, which is really confusing. But basically what that is the difference between the stem volume intercepted, if you take into consideration the surface area of the tree stem, and then the volume that we collected at each of these rain events. So if you have a funneling ratio that is greater than 100%, that actually suggests that there is some wicking or canopy influence going on as water is directed from the outer canopy to the main stem. So we need canopy area to actually make a canopy funneling ratio, which I think would be a more appropriate way of viewing the data. We're not there yet. There's a lot of canopy overlap, so it's not the easiest thing to calculate. But I still think that there are some interesting patterns here, namely that red alder, we're getting a lot of stem flow just over time. And I think that makes sense with the way the red alder, it's very smooth. It conducts water almost like a lightning rod coming down the stem. And you would also expect, it doesn't have any leaves during the winter, but you'd also expect like bigleaf maple maybe to be up there as well. You actually see bigleaf maple producing low amounts of stem flow, along with some of our evergreen species. And one of the reasons for that might be the fact that bigleaf maple is rich in epiphytes, a lot of moss mats on the stem, and these actually might be soaking up some of that stem flow before it becomes collected. So, I'm actually done talking about the three things I want to talk about, so I'm going to give it over to Dylan here.
Great, thanks, Ben. That was great coverage of methods related to a really fun project. And so project has presented us with a lot of opportunities. It's a really fun collaboration. And because I'm at Evergreen, I've been able to really involve students a lot in our component of this work. And so this has been an opportunity for student learning, for understanding our ecosystems, managing our ecosystems, and filling some big knowledge gaps. I'm waiting for control of the screen. There we go. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay. So first, we've been able to integrate more than 100 students into this project, undergraduate students who've worked with the data. We've been able to use this data to test some long-held assumptions, especially about the difference between evergreen and conifer species. We're being able to use that knowledge to understand the impact of tree removal on water balances and fill some gaps in our knowledge. We have a heavily forested region, but there are actually very few studies from a literature perspective, like the one that you're seeing data on today. On the right side here, I have a figure from a classic paper in forest ecosystem studies by Waring. And this is a paper in Science in 1979 that really argued, presented the argument for why our region is dominated by conifer trees. And the reason really has to do with those conifers being able to be productive in the shoulder seasons. And so this data that we're talking about today really is really allowing us to address these kind of hypotheses or ideas about why conifers are dominant, and then put a water spin on it and be able to say, okay, who's moving water when? Are conifers moving water at times that deciduous trees aren't moving water? And how does that balance add up? Additionally, there are obvious differences between a conifer and an evergreen canopy, and that leads to differences in terms of both how they move water out of the system and how they deal with intercepting water out of the canopy. So our data, we're being able to address questions related to this, and that's really exciting because for the first time, we've got a really data-rich approach to this. These are data like what Ben just presented, divided into summer, fall, winter, and spring. And what this is looking at is the speed of water use averaged for the 4 species that we're looking at. So the blue and the red lines are our deciduous species. Big leaf maple's blue, and red is our alder. And then the green and the orange lines are Douglas fir and western red cedar. And you would draw really different conclusions looking at these data, depending on if you had only a data set in the summer or only a data set in the off or the shoulder seasons. And so if you divide this graph right after summer, you would see if you had a question about who is moving water the fastest up the stem and back out into the atmosphere, you would immediately say, well, it's those deciduous trees. They're moving water during those summer months faster than any other species. But if you were wondering about who's moving water in the fall, maybe even in the winter and the early spring, you draw the exact opposite conclusion. So season has a lot to do with how we interpret what's happening for our species. We've also been able to have some interesting insights from individual smaller time periods. These data panels show individual peaks for daily water use by individual trees. So each little bump here is, each little peak is showing an individual day of water use where a tree peaks during the warm hours of the day. Well, what we noticed right away is using output of rainfall, which is down on the bottom panel in black, we saw that we would have these storm events, and quickly after the storm events, we'd see Douglas fir just peak in its water use in the fall. At the same time, we saw red alder just consistently declining in its water use as it began losing its leaves. And that made us really wonder about what's happening in the shoulder season. In fact, when you look in these shoulder seasons, the middle of fall and noticeably now in the spring, we see that we have these rainfall events closely followed by peaks in water use speeds by our Douglas fir and western red cedars. So that's really interesting. It's giving us a lot of insight into how trees differ in their ability to mitigate large storm events. So that's fun to look at and to think about. If we sum that up by season, these data show kind of the maximum speed of water movement within a given season, going through summer, fall, winter, and then spring. And what you can see is that in the summer, we really have big leaf maple taking the lead as the fastest mover of water. When we go into the fall, this switches, and our Douglas fir and western red cedar are moving water on average faster than our 2 deciduous species relative to their maximum rates. In the winter, Douglas fir is still having some significant transpiration, some significant movement of water out into the atmosphere. And then again, in the spring, our conifers are leading. We've also been able to, really early, as soon as this project came online, we hopped to here at Evergreen and started saying, okay, how can we start contributing to the data stream? And undergraduate student researcher of mine immediately hopped on a project where we started looking at interception, much like how Ben described. Only we used a slightly different method that allowed us to look at individual locations underneath the canopy as you go from the base of the tree out towards the outside of the canopy. And here's what we found. During the leaf off periods, we found, this is a 4-panel graph, and the top panels show tree canopy interception as you move from the base of the tree out. And let's look at that orange line. That orange line is western red cedar. And you can see that western red cedar is doing a great job of intercepting rainfall right at the base. And then as you move out, there's a threshold, and it just drops off and starts dropping all that water on the ground. It's a droopy canopy, and the water's just running right off into the ground, but there's a threshold. And if you want to stay dry in a rainstorm, western red cedar is your go-to. Douglas fir has a more consistent drop in its interception as you move out to the edge of the canopy. And interestingly, even in the leaf off period, The blue line, which represents big leaf maple, still shows a lot of interception at the base of that tree. And like Ben talked about, I think that has a lot to loads, all those mosses and ferns right in the big leaf maple. They actually probably play a large role in increasing interception. As we move into the leaf on period, we have a similar pattern, only the interception by our deciduous species in red and blue goes up. Additionally, we were able to see that through measuring soil moisture, we can see how those interception patterns are tied to soil moisture on the ground. So not only can we see the pattern in soil, in rainwater interception by these trees, we can see the impact that it has on soil moisture. And in general, as interception goes down, soil moisture goes up, as you'd expect. So we're hoping to be able to take data like these in the next year, and we'll be using this to spatially model how canopy interception is impacting the water budget for whole stands in areas that Ani and Ben talked about. Okay, so that's really all the slides I have. Just a kind of a quick snapshot, but it's a really exciting project. It's allowing us to increase our understanding of forest water balance significantly, hopefully with some strong implications for stormwater impacts. It's allowing us to think more dynamically about these species, challenge some long-held assumptions, and in many cases, really have some data to back up what we already know about the natural history of these species. And this has really been a really great multi-agency, multi-institution project, which I think is really unique. And so it's been fun to be part of. That's it. So I guess we'll move on to the next phase, whatever that is. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Dylan. Ani, did you want to do, I know we're a little bit past time, but I think, you know, we can stay on for a little bit longer. I know folks will drop off, but we could do a little bit of Q&A, or we can take the Q&A offline. Do you have a preference there?
I think there's one kind of question that's hanging out in the Q&A, and we could try to address it, but I'm okay. Others will hang around for a little bit and we can address questions in the Q&A chat box. But there's only one question at this point that really needs to be answered. It's kind of a interesting question, and if people are willing to opine about it, I would love to hear it. The question is, you know, typically in the past, multifamily developments have often been removed. It says tree canopy in places like Seattle often add trees, especially in existing multifamily development. And it's, I guess I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but it's in the question that I think the thing that we can consider is why, you know, developers tend to get the blame for tree canopy loss, and it's labeled as anti-environment. Have any of us been doing anything to combat this idea? And I hope I did justice to Kelsey Hamlin's question, and I think the point she made was that maybe there was more, there's no more nuance to than just blaming development for canopy loss. Anyone want to try to answer that?
Well, I guess I just answer, I think that, I think the whole project is really just trying to get a better handle on quantifying exactly what's happening when with trees. And so, we're at least that project, as that question applies to the project you just heard about, we're more in the business of kind of trying to understand how the system works and what people do with that information. Hopefully they use it wisely.
And I think the question was posed pretty early on, so it might not have been necessarily addressed to.
Might be for an earlier group.
For an earlier. I will say, I think, Mike, maybe you have something to add to it, but I've worked with developers and helped other people do LID trainings for developers. And I know there's a keen interest amongst the developer community to develop the landscape using retaining trees. Now, that may not be the common practice, but there are definitely people out there interested. Mike, I'll let you wind it out, and then I'll be quiet. And Aaron, maybe we can close down after that.
Yeah, I can say on a municipal standpoint, I think one of the pieces of data that didn't really dive into earlier about the tree canopy analysis is that you can actually further refine that information based on land use and zoning as well. And I think in our communities, we all recognize that not all land is created equal and that there are some incompatible land uses perhaps for forested space or additional trees. And then there are some areas where we would really target tree planting. So I mentioned briefly that through the canopy analysis, you're able to define what is plantable area. And so that plantable area could be bare ground or grass or areas that could easily host more trees. And what we find within our regional growth centers or our areas that we're trying to densify, there's not as much available land. And so I guess what I would say to that is, certainly we want in our communities development. We want smart development. We want to make sure that we can cohabitate, available green space and amenities to the public with denser developed areas, but we also recognize that not all areas can host a forest, let's say. So I wouldn't say that we're at odds between trees and development. Certainly, I think that they can be compatible and they can coexist, but there are some areas that are more conducive to more trees. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but I guess it's something that we grapple with a lot.
Thanks, Mike. I'll go ahead and wrap us up. And just want to acknowledge again all of the speakers. It's really, really fascinating work, and including making sure that trees really are, an influential hallmark of what green infrastructure is, and a great example of the multiple benefits that come. That I think when Chris did her survey and people identified stormwater, that's because this is largely a stormwater audience. But when you poll broader audiences, you'll definitely see that most people think about the benefits of trees from a very different perspective. But that question that was posed about the push and pull between development and trees, and I've heard the criticism even before that being a rain garden person myself, that rain gardens oftentimes are held up as this, oh, you can cut down the trees on your property, replace them with rain gardens, get the same functions, and it's a great way to incentivize the cutting down of trees. And we certainly try in all of our outreach and education to point out that that's by and large very counterproductive to the goals. But there is this pitting. We certainly have seen it in Seattle with the housing and livability efforts that have gone forward, where density and community associations that would like stronger tree ordinances get pitted against each other, and these are definitely the sticky, tricky questions. I think the best responses I've heard from some of my colleagues are simply that we need both. We certainly cannot be putting the need of trees ahead of housing. We can't put housing ahead of environmental quality for all either. We really need both but there's no reason that developers building density can't also include trees and other forms of green infrastructure, retain trees and all of these things. And the weaving together is the great messy murk of the work that we do. And it's a beautiful thing, but none of us are going to figure it out alone. And that's why we do this. This is why we talk, and this is why we have a summit, and this is why we have networks. So it's really critical. I deeply appreciate that question, and it gets right at the heart of the intersectionality. Way over on time, but again, a ton of gratitude. Want to give a few shout outs to a few other things going on. You'll be able to see this video on YouTube. It'll be posted there in a day or two. You'll find links to that on the Summit webpage, or the Stewardship Partners YouTube channel. Also want to shout out, today's the last day of Give Big. Many of these nonprofits that you've seen represented in their work are looking for funding and fundraising right now through that, as well as many of the social cause organizations that are feeding people who have been hit really hard and are at the front lines of this COVID pandemic. So it's a great opportunity to invest in that. Also, a shout out to this Survive the Sound game. If you haven't seen it, Long Live the Kings is putting it on. If you like fish and like clean water, watching these fish try and survive the marine environment after they've been hatched and out migrate is a big and exciting and highlights some real troubling spots that we've got out there. So check that out. And with that, just a huge thank you to everyone for participating, and see you all on Friday. Oh yes, and Friday's session is on education. We'll have some powerful youth voices. Definitely always a highlight of the summit every year. So be sure to tune in to that. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Happy Wednesday. Take care. Be safe.